The medical room was white and cold. Commander Zekathara sat in a chair that was too small for his large body. His scales were gray with age, and scars covered his arms and chest. Each scar told a story of battle, but the deepest wounds were the ones nobody could see. Across from him sat Velnari, a journalist from the Galactic News Network. She had traveled far to reach this place, a hospital for broken soldiers on the edge of known space. Her recording device sat between them on the small table. "Are you ready to begin?" Velnari asked. Her voice was soft and careful. Zekathara's 4 eyes looked at her for a long moment. 2 of his eyes were cloudy from old injuries. The other 2 held a sadness that seemed to go on forever. "I have been ready for 20 years, he said. His voice was deep and rough. "But I was not brave enough to speak until now." The recording device blinked red. The interview had started. "Tell me about the Third Galactic War," Velnari said. Zekathara's clawed hands gripped the arms of his chair. "The war that broke us all," he whispered. "The war that taught us what real monsters look like." He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, alien ships moved through space like tiny lights. The galaxy looked peaceful from here. It was hard to believe that 20 years ago everything had been fire and death. "When the humans first came to us, we laughed," Zekathara said. "Their ships were slow and ugly. Their weapons were simple. They came from a small blue world at the edge of nothing. We thought they were just another weak race that would bow to the hegemony. The hegemony had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years. Hundreds of worlds, dozens of species, all under one flag. The Takshari-like Zekathara were the soldiers. The Velkari-like Velnari were the thinkers. The massive Goliaths were the workers. Every race had its place, and every place served the greater good. The humans wanted to trade with us," Zekathara continued. "They offered things from their world, food, art, music, simple things. We took what we wanted and gave them scraps in return. It was how we always did business with new races." Velnari made notes on her pad. "When did things change?" "The humans complained about the trade deals. They said we were cheating them. They wanted fair treatment." Zekathara made a sound that might have been laughter, but there was no joy in it. Fair treatment, as if they had any right to demand anything from us. The Hegemony Council had been annoyed by human demands. These tiny creatures from nowhere dared to question the way things worked. Some council members wanted to ignore them. Others wanted to teach them a lesson. "The humans stopped trading with us," Zekathara said. "They closed their borders. They said they would find other ways to get what they needed. The council was angry. No one said no to the hegemony. No one. War had been inevitable. The hegemony had fought many wars against stubborn species. It always ended the same way. A few battles, some destroyed cities, and then surrender. The new race would learn its place and join the great empire. I was a commander then," Zekathara said. "I led the 47th Assault Legion. We were good soldiers. We had taken 12 worlds for the hegemony. We knew how to fight. We knew how to win." His voice grew distant as he remembered those days. The pride of wearing the uniform, the respect of his soldiers, the certainty that they served a cause greater than themselves. "The war planners said it would be easy," Zekathara continued. "The humans had 50 worlds, but they were spread out and weak. Their armies were small. Their technology was old. We would take their worlds one by one, and they would surrender before we reached their home planet. The first target had been chosen carefully. New Pittsburgh was a mining colony on the edge of human space. 50,000 humans lived there, digging metals from the ground and sending them back to Earth. It had no military bases, no great weapons, no strategic value, except as a symbol. We came with 3 battle cruisers and 20,000 soldiers, Zekathara said. More than enough to take one small colony. The humans had maybe 1,000 security guards and some old mining equipment. It should have been over in a few days. Velnari looked up from her notes. But it wasn't? Zekathara's good eyes stared at something she couldn't see, something far away and long ago. The first day went as planned, he said slowly. We bombed their spaceport and their government buildings. We landed our troops and took the main city. The human leaders came out with white flags. They wanted to surrender. Standard procedure was simple. Accept the surrender, take the leaders prisoner, and let the people know they were now part of the hegemony. Some would resist at first, but hunger and fear would bring them in line. It always worked. General Corax accepted their surrender, Zekathara said. He was a good soldier, honorable. He treated prisoners well and followed all the rules of war. He set up camps for the humans and started processing them for relocation. But something had felt wrong from the beginning. The human leaders had surrendered too easily. Their soldiers had put down their weapons without a fight. The civilians had been too calm, too organized as they moved to the camps. On the second day, our supply convoy disappeared, Zekathara said. 20 trucks carrying food and ammunition. They were traveling on a safe road between the spaceport and the city. They just vanished. Search teams found the convoy 3 hours later. The trucks were destroyed, but not by any weapon the hegemony knew. The explosions had come from underneath, as if the road itself had attacked them. All 40 hegemony soldiers were dead. We thought it was an accident at first, Zekathara said. Maybe some old mining explosives had been left in the ground, but then the second convoy disappeared. And the third. The humans in the camp said they knew nothing. They seemed as surprised as anyone. Their leaders shook their heads and promised to help find the attackers. They suggested that resistance fighters must be hiding in the mountains. General Corax sent search teams into the wilderness, Zekathara said. Good soldiers with the best equipment. They found nothing. No camps, no weapons, no sign that anyone was hiding out there. But every day more of our people died. The attacks grew bolder. Communication towers fell in the night. Guard posts went silent one by one. Patrols found dead hegemony soldiers arranged in strange patterns, as if someone was sending a message. After a week, we realized we were not fighting an army, Zekathara said. We were fighting ghosts. The humans we had captured were still in the camps. The leaders were still cooperating, but someone was killing us and we could not find them. Velnari leaned forward. Who was it? Zekathara's scales rippled with old fear. It was all of them, he whispered. Every human on that world. The farmers, the miners, the shopkeepers, the children. They had all become soldiers, but they looked like innocent people. The truth had come slowly, piece by piece. The human who cleaned General Corax's office was mapping their security systems. The human cook was poisoning random meals with slow-acting toxins. The human doctor treating hegemony wounded was making them sicker instead of better. They did not fight like soldiers, Zekathara said. Soldiers wear uniforms. They carry flags. They have honor. These humans looked like harmless civilians, but they killed without mercy or warning. The mining equipment had been turned into weapons. The delivery trucks carried bombs instead of supplies. The communication networks the humans had built were being used to coordinate attacks against the very forces that had conquered them. We could not tell friend from enemy, Zekathara said. Every human face looked innocent. Every human hand might hold a knife. We stopped sleeping. We stopped eating food they prepared. We stopped trusting anything. The war that was supposed to last 3 days stretched into weeks, then months. More hegemony ships arrived with more soldiers, but it made no difference. The humans adapted to every tactic, countered every strategy, and turned every advantage against their enemies. General Corax broke first, Zekathara said quietly. He started seeing human assassins everywhere. He would not eat, would not sleep, would not leave his bunker. They found him one morning with his own weapon in his hand. He had chosen death over facing another day of this war. That was when Zekathara had taken command. That was when he learned what it really meant to fight. Humans. Zekathara stared at his clawed hands. The scars on his arms seemed to pulse with old pain as he remembered taking command on New Pittsburgh. The weight of leadership had felt heavy then, but nothing compared to what came after. When I became the commander, I thought I could fix things, he told Velnari. I had fought in 12 wars. I knew how to deal with resistance fighters, but these humans were different from anything we had ever faced. The first thing Zekathara had done was study the attacks. Every destroyed convoy, every dead patrol, every sabotaged building. He looked for patterns, for weaknesses, for some way to understand how the humans were fighting. The attacks made no sense, he said. There was no military logic to them. Real soldiers would have tried to capture our weapons or our vehicles. These humans just destroyed everything and disappeared. A normal resistance would have leaders, bases, supply lines. They would make demands, send messages, try to negotiate. The humans did none of these things. They just killed and vanished like smoke. I decided to search every building in the main city, Zekthara continued. If humans were hiding weapons, we would find them. If they had secret meeting places, we would discover them. I sent my best soldiers to tear the place apart. The search had taken 2 weeks. Hegemony troops had broken down doors, searched basements, checked every room and closet. They found mining tools, family pictures, children's toys, and normal household items. No weapons, no plans, no evidence of any organized resistance. But while my soldiers searched the city, the attacks got worse, Zekthara said. It was like the humans were laughing at us. The more we looked for them, the more they hurt us. That was when he met Lisa Murphy. She had been working in the main power plant when the hegemony took the colony, a simple maintenance worker who fixed broken machines and kept the electricity running. She was small and quiet, with brown hair and gentle eyes. She always smiled when hegemony soldiers walked past. She volunteered to help us, Zekthara said. She knew all the underground tunnels where the power cables ran. She offered to guide our teams through the system so we could secure it properly. Lisa Murphy had led a squad of 8 hegemony soldiers into the tunnels beneath the city. She showed them every junction, every access point, every vulnerable spot in the power grid. She answered all their questions and made helpful suggestions about security. 3 hours later, the entire power system exploded, Zekthara said. The blast was so big it shook buildings 5 blocks away. All 8 soldiers died instantly. The city went dark for 6 days. When they found Lisa Murphy, she was back at her apartment cooking dinner like nothing had happened. She seemed shocked to hear about the explosion. She cried when they told her about the dead soldiers. She offered to help rebuild what had been destroyed. We arrested her, of course, Zekthara said. But she just kept insisting she was innocent. She said she had left the soldiers at the main junction and gone home. She had no idea what had happened. Under questioning, Lisa Murphy never broke. She maintained her story even when they used drugs and pain to make her talk. Either she was telling the truth or she was the best liar in the galaxy. We executed her, Zekthara said quietly. It was the only thing we could do. But killing her solved nothing. The attacks continued. The next human was Jake Williams, a farmer who grew food crops in the fields outside the city. He was old and friendly, with hands weathered by years of honest work. He had a wife and 3 children. He seemed like the most harmless person on the planet. Jake offered to use his farming equipment to help us, Zekthara said. He had big machines for planting and harvesting. He said we could use them to build barriers and dig defensive positions. Jake Williams had worked alongside hegemony engineers for days. His massive farming machines moved tons of dirt and rock, creating fortified positions around the main base. He taught alien soldiers how to operate the controls and maintain the engines. On the 4th night, Jake's machines came alive, Zekthara said. They had been programmed to activate automatically. They drove themselves into our base and exploded. The blasts killed 60 soldiers and destroyed our main communications center. Jake Williams had been in his farmhouse when it happened, sleeping peacefully with his family. Security cameras showed he had never left his property. Either the machines had malfunctioned in an impossible way, or Jake had found a method of remote control that hegemony technology could not detect. We searched his house and found nothing, Zekthara said. No transmitters, no detonators, no evidence of sabotage, just a simple farmer's home with pictures of his children on the walls. They arrested Jake Williams anyway. Under interrogation, he seemed genuinely confused about what had happened. He suggested that maybe the alien modifications to his equipment had created some kind of malfunction. He offered to help investigate the problem. We shot him too, Zekthara said, and his wife and children because we could not take any chances. But it changed nothing. The humans kept finding new ways to kill us. Then there was Dr. Susan Hayes, who ran the colony's medical center. She was middle-aged and professional, with gray hair and tired eyes. She had spent her whole life helping sick people get better. When our soldiers started getting sick, Dr. Hayes offered to help, Zekathara said. She said she knew how to treat humans, but she wanted to learn about alien biology so she could help us too. Dr. Hayes had been incredibly helpful. She worked day and night treating hegemony soldiers who had been injured in attacks. She asked detailed questions about alien physiology and took careful notes about how their bodies worked. The sickness started small, Zekathara said. Just a few soldiers with stomach problems. Dr. Hayes said it was probably something they ate. She gave them medicine and they felt better. But more soldiers got sick. Then more. Soon half the base was suffering from fever, weakness, and pain. Dr. Hayes worked harder than ever, treating hundreds of patients with the same gentle care she had always shown. It took us weeks to realize that the soldiers Dr. Hayes treated got sicker, not better, Zekathara said. She was giving them medicine that looked helpful but actually made the disease worse. She was using her medical knowledge to kill us slowly. When they finally tested Dr. Hayes' treatments, they found a biological weapon designed specifically to attack hegemony physiology. It was incredibly sophisticated, tailored to each alien species' weaknesses. It would have taken years of research to develop. Dr. Hayes had been studying us from the moment we arrived, Zekathara said. Every blood sample, every medical exam, every question about our health was gathering data for her weapon. She turned healing into murder. Under interrogation, Dr. Hayes admitted everything. She explained calmly how she had analyzed alien biology and developed targeted pathogens. She showed no guilt, no fear, only professional pride in her work. She said it was her duty as a doctor to protect her people, Zekathara said. She said that if aliens were going to hurt humans, then she would hurt aliens back. She spoke about mass murder like it was medical treatment. They executed Dr. Hayes, but the damage was done. Hundreds of hegemony soldiers died from her biological weapons. The survivors lived in constant fear of getting sick again. That was when I started to understand, Zekathara said. These humans were not soldiers pretending to be civilians. They were civilians who had become something worse than soldiers. They had no uniforms, no ranks, no military discipline, but they fought with a dedication that terrified me. The humans on New Pittsburgh had turned their entire society into a weapon. Every person had a role to play. Every skill had a military application. Every act of cooperation was actually an act of war. They studied us, Zekathara said. While we were trying to conquer them, they were learning everything about us. Our weaknesses, our fears, our ways of thinking. They turned our own strengths against us. Normal enemies fought with honor. They followed rules. They treated prisoners well and avoided harming civilians. The humans followed no rules except victory. They would sacrifice anything, do anything, become anything to win. After 3 months on New Pittsburgh, I had lost half my soldiers, Zekathara said. Not to battles or explosions, but to fear. They could not sleep, could not eat, could not trust anyone. The humans had broken their minds without even touching them. Velnari looked up from her notes. Her own hands were shaking slightly. How did it end? Zekathara's eyes grew distant. It did not end. We just left. After 6 months, the hegemony command decided that New Pittsburgh was not worth the cost. We pulled back to our ships and abandoned the colony. As they retreated, the humans had lined the streets to watch them go. They did not cheer or celebrate. They just stood there quietly with the same gentle expressions they had worn throughout the occupation. Lisa Murphy's neighbors, Jake Williams' friends, Dr. Hayes' patients. They looked so innocent, Zekathara whispered, like normal people, living normal lives. But I knew the truth. Every single one of them was a weapon waiting to be used. Every smile hid a mind thinking about new ways to kill. The retreat from New Pittsburgh had been the hegemony's first military defeat in 300 years. But it was only the beginning. The humans had more worlds and now they knew how to fight. Zekathara's breathing grew heavy as he continued his story. The medical monitors beside his bed showed his heart rate climbing. Velnari watched him carefully, ready to stop the interview if needed. After New Pittsburgh, they promoted me, Zekthara said. The High Command thought I had learned valuable lessons about fighting humans. They put me in charge of 3 battle groups and told me to take 5 more human worlds. The hegemony had been angry about losing New Pittsburgh, but they told themselves it was just bad luck. One colony could not represent all of humanity. The next attacks would be different. They would be ready for human tricks. We changed our tactics, Zekthara continued. No more trusting human civilians. No more accepting help from locals. We would treat every human as a potential enemy and maintain strict military discipline. The second target had been New Atlantis, a water world where humans lived on floating cities and underwater domes. Most of the planet was ocean, with small chains of islands scattered across the surface. 50 million humans called it home. Water worlds are easy to conquer, Zekthara said. You control the air and the surface, and the enemy has nowhere to run. We brought atmospheric fighters and naval vessels. We had enough firepower to boil the oceans if needed. The initial assault went perfectly. Hegemony forces destroyed the human orbital defenses and took control of the sky. Their warships surrounded the floating cities while dropships landed on the main islands. Within hours, they controlled every major population center. The human leaders surrendered immediately, Zekthara said. They said they could not fight against such superior technology. They offered to cooperate fully with the occupation forces. But the oceans of New Atlantis were vast and deep. Under the water, where hegemony sensors could not reach, the real war was just beginning. On the 3rd day, one of our destroyers just disappeared, Zekthara said. It was patrolling the Northern Ocean when all contact was lost. We found pieces of it floating on the surface, but most of the wreckage had sunk into the deep water. Search teams found no evidence of what had destroyed the ship. The humans in the nearby floating cities seemed as surprised as anyone. They offered to help with rescue operations and provided maps of the underwater currents. Then we lost a second ship, and a third, Zekthara said. Each time, the wreckage told the same story. Something had attacked from below, striking with precision at the most vulnerable points. The hegemony had never fought a naval war against humans before. Their own ships were designed for space combat, adapted for water operations. They were powerful, but clumsy in the ocean environment. The humans had lived on that water world for 200 years, Zekthara said. They knew every current, every depth, every hiding place in those oceans. They had turned the sea itself into their ally. The attacks came from submarines that appeared on no sensors, weapons that struck from impossible distances, sea creatures that had been trained or modified to carry explosives. The ocean around New Atlantis became a death trap for any hegemony vessel. We tried to hunt them down, Zekthara said. We sent our best pilots in atmospheric fighters to search for the submarine bases. We used deep-sea probes to map the ocean floor. We interrogated every human we could find. But the underwater war followed no rules that hegemony tacticians understood. The human submarines did not operate from fixed bases. They did not follow predictable patrol routes. They struck without warning and vanished into the depths like ghosts. I decided to capture one of their submarine commanders, Zekthara said. If we could not find their bases, maybe we could learn their tactics. We set traps using fake supply convoys and damaged ships as bait. The trap had worked perfectly. A human submarine had attacked what appeared to be a crippled hegemony transport, but the transport was actually a heavily armed warship in disguise, surrounded by hidden attack craft. The human submarine was caught and disabled before it could escape. The submarine's captain was named Dan Foster, Zekthara said. He was a career military officer, not a civilian like the others we had fought. I thought maybe a real soldier would be different from the monsters on New Pittsburgh. Colonel Dan Foster had been calm and professional during his capture. He followed the standard rules for prisoners of war, giving only his name, rank, and serial number. He seemed like the kind of honorable enemy that Zekthara could understand. I talked with him for hours, Zekthara said. I wanted to understand how humans thought about war. I hoped he could explain why his people fought with such terrible methods. Foster had been surprisingly willing to discuss military philosophy. He spoke about human military history, about famous battles and great commanders. He seemed genuinely interested in comparing human and hegemony tactical approaches. He told me that humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years, Zekthara said. Every generation had learned from the last, building on centuries of military knowledge. War was not just something they did, it was something they studied like a science. Foster explained that human military academies taught courses on psychological warfare, asymmetric tactics, and resource management. Human officers learned about logistics, intelligence gathering, and strategic deception. They studied the art of war like other species studied medicine or engineering. He said that most alien species fought for honor or glory, Zekthara said. But humans fought to win. Everything else was secondary to victory. If breaking rules would save human lives, they would break rules. If using cruel tactics would end the war faster, they would use cruel tactics. Foster had drawn diagrams showing how human submarine tactics worked. He explained how they used the ocean currents to mask their movements, how they coordinated attacks across vast distances, how they turned the hegemony's own technology against them. He was teaching me, Zekthara realized. While I thought I was interrogating him, he was actually studying our methods and learning our weaknesses. Every question I asked gave him information about how we operated. But Foster's real lesson came 3 days later, during the Battle of Kepler Station. The station was a massive orbital platform that served as the main supply depot for hegemony forces in the New Atlantis system. It held enough food, fuel, and ammunition to support the occupation for years. Protecting it were 12 warships and 300 fighters. The humans attacked with everything they had, Zekthara said. Every ship, every pilot, every weapon they could find. It was a desperate assault against impossible odds. The human fleet was outnumbered 10-1. Their ships were older and less powerful than hegemony vessels. Any rational commander would have avoided such a hopeless battle. Their fleet commander was Admiral Kate Morrison, Zekthara said. She led the attack personally, broadcasting on all frequencies so we could hear her giving orders to her ships. Morrison's tactics made no sense from a military perspective. She sent her ships in small groups that were easily destroyed by concentrated hegemony fire. She wasted ammunition on targets that had no strategic value. She seemed to be throwing away her entire fleet for nothing. But Morrison was not trying to win a normal battle, Zekthara said. She was solving a different problem entirely. While we were focused on destroying her ships, she was maneuvering one small group toward a specific target. The target was the station's main reactor, protected by heavy armor and defensive shields. No conventional weapon could penetrate those defenses, but Morrison was not using conventional weapons. She rammed her flagship directly into the reactor core, Zekthara said. The explosion destroyed the entire station and killed everyone on board. 200,000 hegemony personnel died instantly. Morrison had sacrificed 50,000 human lives to eliminate a strategic target. The cost was enormous, but the result was decisive. Without Kepler Station, the hegemony could not maintain their occupation of New Atlantis. Foster smiled when he heard about the attack, Zekthara said. He congratulated me on witnessing human tactical innovation in action. He explained that Morrison had calculated the acceptable loss ratio and determined that trading 50,000 human lives for 200,000 alien lives was strategically sound. The cold mathematics of it had horrified Zekthara. Foster spoke about mass death like an engineering problem. He used terms like force multiplication and strategic exchange ratios to describe the deliberate sacrifice of human beings. He told me that every human military officer learned these calculations, Zekthara said. They studied historical battles where commanders had traded lives for advantage. They practiced making these decisions in training simulations. Foster explained that human generals planned for acceptable casualty rates before every battle. They calculated how many soldiers they could afford to lose and still achieve their objectives. They prepared backup plans that assumed even higher losses. He said that most alien species could not fight this way, Zekthara said. We valued individual lives too much to spend them like currency. But humans had evolved as pack hunters who sacrificed themselves for the group. Military service just organized that instinct. Foster showed him intercepted human communications from other battles. Radio transmissions where human soldiers calmly discussed using themselves as bait. Orders where human commanders assigned troops to missions everyone knew were suicide attacks. Zekthara's hand shook as he reached for the water cup beside his bed. The clear liquid trembled in the glass, matching the tremor in his voice. Velnari noticed that several medical alarms had started blinking yellow on the machines around them. "Do you need to rest?" she asked gently. "No," Zekthara said. "If I stop now, I might never have the courage to finish. You need to hear about Kepler 442b. You need to understand what they did to us there." After losing New Atlantis, the Hegemony High Command had decided to end the human problem, once and for all. They gathered the largest military force in their history. 3 full battle fleets, 500,000 soldiers, and enough firepower to crack a planet in half. They chose Kepler 442b because it was humanity's fortress world, Zekthara said. The humans had been building defenses there for 50 years. If we could break their strongest position, the rest would surrender. Kepler 442b was a rocky world with thick forests and tall mountains. 20 million humans lived in cities built into the mountainsides and underground tunnel systems. It was the perfect defensive position, but the hegemony had overwhelming force. "The High Command put me in charge of the ground assault," Zekthara said. "They told me to use everything I had learned about human tactics. They said this time would be different." The orbital bombardment had lasted for 3 days. Hegemony. Warships rained fire on every human city, every military base, every structure larger than a house. The planet's surface burned under the assault, creating firestorms visible from space. "When we finally landed, we found nothing," Zekthara said. "The cities were empty ruins. The military bases were abandoned. It was like the humans had simply vanished into the air. But the humans had not vanished. They had gone underground, deeper than any species had ever gone before." The tunnels beneath Kepler 442b stretched for thousands of kilometers, connecting vast caverns where entire populations could hide. "We found the first tunnel entrance on day 4, Zekthara said. It looked like a natural cave, but our sensors detected artificial structures inside. I sent a full company down to investigate. The company had consisted of 200 elite soldiers, the best equipment, and enough firepower to destroy a small city. They had orders to map the tunnels and report back within 6 hours. They never came back," Zekthara said. "We lost contact after 30 minutes. When we sent rescue teams, we found the tunnel had collapsed. 200 soldiers buried alive under tons of rock. The humans had been waiting in those tunnels for 2 years. They had spent that time studying every hegemony weapon, every piece of equipment, every tactical manual they could capture. They knew exactly how their enemies would fight. We tried using drilling equipment to dig new tunnels," Zekthara said. "The humans had seeded the entire underground system with explosives. Every time we broke through to a new chamber, the whole section would collapse." The few soldiers who survived the cave-ins told impossible stories. They spoke of tunnels that seemed to move and change shape, chambers that appeared empty but filled with deadly gas when intruders entered, passages that led in circles, trapping invaders in endless mazes. "Lieutenant Ben Carter designed those tunnel systems," Zekthara said. "He was a human engineer who specialized in underground construction. We captured him after 6 weeks of fighting." Carter had been calm and polite during his interrogation. He answered questions about the tunnel design with the enthusiasm of an artist discussing his masterpiece. He seemed proud of what he had created. "He told us that the entire planet was one giant weapon," Zekthara said. "Every tunnel, every chamber, every passage had been designed to kill intruders. He had spent 2 years turning solid rock into a death trap." Carter explained how human engineers had studied hegemony tactics and equipment specifications. They knew exactly how tall alien soldiers were, how much weight their armor could carry, how their weapons operated in confined spaces. "The tunnels were built to exploit our weaknesses," Zekthara said. "The ceilings were too low for our tallest soldiers. The passages were too narrow for our heavy weapons. The air circulation was designed to spread poisons that affected alien biology. But Carter's real innovation was the psychological warfare built into the tunnel system itself. The humans had studied how different alien species reacted to enclosed spaces, darkness, and isolation. Every species in the hegemony had different fears, Zekthera said. Carter had designed sections of tunnels specifically to terrify each one. Chambers that played sounds that drove Takshari soldiers insane. Passages filled with scents that made Velkari panic. Lights that triggered seizures in Goliath warriors. Carter showed them maps of the tunnel system with clinical detachment. He pointed out kill zones, trap chambers, and escape routes with the same tone he might use to describe plumbing systems. To him, mass murder was just an engineering problem. He said the tunnels were not really meant to kill us, Zekthara said. They were meant to break our minds. Dead soldiers could be replaced, but soldiers who were afraid to fight were useless forever. The psychological assault worked perfectly. Hegemony troops began refusing orders to enter the tunnels. Those who did go underground came back changed, jumping at shadows and screaming in their sleep. The human defenses were turning elite soldiers into broken wrecks. After 2 months, I had lost 60,000 soldiers, Zekthara said. Not just dead, but wounded, missing, and mentally destroyed. The humans had barely shown themselves, but they were destroying my army. That was when the Hegemony Command decided to abandon the underground assault and focus on the surface war. If they could not dig the humans out, they would force them to come up and fight in the open. We started bombing their supply lines, Zekthara said. Food storage facilities, water treatment plants, power generation systems. We wanted to starve them out of their holes. But the humans had spent 2 years preparing for siege warfare. Their underground cities had enough food and water to last for decades. Their power systems were completely independent from the surface. They could wait underground longer than the hegemony could wait above. The real surface war began when they started coming out at night, Zekthara said. Small groups of human soldiers who struck at our camps and disappeared before we could respond. These night raids followed no pattern that hegemony tacticians could predict. Sometimes they attacked supply convoys. Sometimes they destroyed communication equipment. Sometimes they just killed sentries and left messages written in alien blood. The messages were always the same, Zekthara said. Lists of names and home colonies for the soldiers who had died. The humans knew everything about us. They knew where we came from, who our families were, what we feared most. The psychological warfare reached new levels of sophistication. Human raiders would leave personal items from dead hegemony soldiers arranged in patterns around their camps. They would broadcast the last words of dying aliens on all communication frequencies. They turned every death into a weapon against morale. Then they started the real bombing campaign, Zekthara said. Not random explosions, but calculated strikes designed to cause maximum fear and confusion. The humans had studied hegemony base, design, and found the psychological weak points. They knew which buildings soldiers considered safe, which routes they used most often, which systems they depended on most heavily. They would bomb our medical facilities while leaving our weapons. Depots untouched, Zekthara said. They wanted us to know that nowhere was safe. But they also wanted us to keep fighting so they could kill more of us. The bombing campaign followed rules that made no military sense but perfect psychological sense. Attacks came at random intervals that prevented soldiers from sleeping. Targets were chosen to create maximum anxiety rather than maximum damage. The goal was not to destroy the hegemony force but to drive it insane. After 4 months, my soldiers were afraid of everything, Zekthara said. They would not eat food that might be poisoned. They would not sleep in buildings that might collapse. They would not use equipment that might explode. The breaking point came during the assault on New Houston, the last major human city on the surface. Intelligence suggested that capturing it would end human resistance and force a surrender. General Amy Rodriguez commanded the human forces in New Houston, Zekthara said. She was their greatest military leader, and killing her would break human morale across the entire planet. The assault on New Houston had been the largest ground battle of the war. 300,000 hegemony soldiers against 50,000 human defenders. The humans were outnumbered 6-1, with inferior weapons and no air support. The battle lasted 6 weeks, Zekthara said. Every street was a battlefield. Every building was a fortress. The humans fought for every meter of ground like it was the most important place in the galaxy. But something felt wrong about the battle from the beginning. The human resistance was fierce but not desperate. They fought hard but always seemed to have an escape route. They killed thousands of hegemony soldiers but never seemed to be running out of ammunition. On the final day we broke through their last defenses, Zekthara said. My soldiers stormed the city center where Rodriguez had her headquarters. We expected to find thousands of human soldiers making their last stand. The medical machines around Zekthara's bed were beeping faster now. His breathing was shallow and his scales had turned a sickly gray color. But his eyes were clear as he looked at Velnari, and his voice was steady. You want to know how the war ended, he said. Everyone thinks the hegemony won because we are still here and the humans are still in their corner of space. But that is not what really happened. Velnari leaned forward. This was the part of the story that no official record contained. The hegemony's version of events was very different from what Zekthara was telling her. After Kepler 442b, the High Command wanted to pull back and regroup, Zekthara said. We had lost almost 1 million soldiers in 18 months of fighting. Our fleets were damaged, our troops were broken, and we had barely taken 3 human worlds. But the humans had not waited for the hegemony to recover. While alien forces licked their wounds and planned new strategies, humanity had been busy preparing for the next phase of the war. They started attacking our homeworlds, Zekthara said. Not with fleets or armies, but with small groups of human soldiers who appeared out of nowhere and struck at our most important targets. The first attack had been on Velkar Prime, the intellectual center of the hegemony. A team of 12 humans had somehow infiltrated the planetary defense grid and destroyed the main university complex. Thousands of years of scientific research were lost in the explosions. No one knew how they got past our security, Zekthara said. The humans had no ships in the system, no bases within 100 light years, but they appeared on our most heavily defended world and vanished again like ghosts. More attacks followed. Human commando teams struck at factory worlds, mining colonies, and research stations deep inside hegemony space. They seemed to know exactly which targets would cause the most damage to the war effort. They were not trying to conquer our worlds, Zekthara said. They were trying to make us afraid. They wanted us to know that nowhere was safe, that they could reach us anywhere, anytime they chose. The psychological impact was devastating. Hegemony citizens who had felt secure for 1,000 years suddenly lived in fear. Children had nightmares about human monsters. Adults refused to work in important facilities that might be targets. The economy started collapsing, Zekthara said. People were too afraid to do their jobs. Factory workers stayed home rather than risk being killed by human raiders. Scientists abandoned their research rather than paint targets on their backs. The High Command tried to increase security, but it was impossible to guard every important location in an empire that spanned half the galaxy. The humans seemed to have unlimited resources and perfect intelligence about hegemony operations. That was when we realized the truth, Zekthara said. The humans were not just fighting a war, they were fighting the future. They had been preparing for this conflict since the day they met us. Intelligence reports revealed the scope of human preparation. For 50 years, since first contact with the hegemony, humanity had been studying their new neighbors. They had learned every language, mapped every world, and identified every weakness in the galactic order. They had been placing agents throughout our territory for decades, Zekthara said. Human spies who looked like other species, who had learned to think like aliens, who had become part of our society while remaining loyal to Earth. These human agents had been gathering information about hegemony military capabilities, economic systems, and political structures. They knew which worlds produced essential materials, which leaders made important decisions, and which systems were vulnerable to disruption. When the war started, they already knew how to win it, Zekthara said. Every battle, every strategy, every tactic had been planned years in advance. We thought we were fighting a desperate enemy, but we were actually fighting a carefully prepared trap. The human war plan had never been to defeat the hegemony in direct combat. Their goal was to make the cost of fighting them higher than the cost of leaving them alone. Every human death, every destroyed city, every lost battle was part of a larger strategy. They were teaching us to fear them, Zekathara said. Every horrific tactic, every impossible victory, every broken rule of warfare was a lesson. They wanted us to understand that fighting humans was too expensive to be worth the price. After 2 years of war, the hegemony economy was in ruins. Military spending had consumed resources needed for basic services. Millions of aliens lived in fear of human retaliation. The great galactic empire was tearing itself apart, trying to defeat a species that represented less than 1% of its population. The High Council called for peace negotiations, Zekathara said. They said it was to save alien lives, but everyone knew the truth. We were surrendering because we could not afford to keep fighting. The peace talks had been held on a neutral space station at the edge of both territories. Zekathara had been present as a military advisor, though by then he was already showing signs of the psychological damage that would eventually put him in this hospital. The human delegation was led by Secretary of State Helen Ross, Zekathara said. She was a small, elderly woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She looked like someone's grandmother, not a representative of the most terrifying military force in the galaxy. Ross had been polite and professional throughout the negotiations. She spoke softly and smiled often. She seemed genuinely concerned about the suffering the war had caused on both sides. But when she presented the human terms for peace, we understood that we were not negotiating, Zekathara said. We were being told how the future would work. The human peace proposal had been comprehensive and non-negotiable. Humanity would be recognized as an independent power with sovereignty over their current territory. All hegemony forces would withdraw from human space immediately. Trade between the two powers would be conducted on equal terms. Ross explained that humanity was not asking for permission, Zekathara said. She was informing us how things would be. If the hegemony accepted these terms, there would be peace. If not, the war would continue until we changed our minds. To demonstrate their sincerity, Ross had provided detailed intelligence about hegemony military capabilities, economic weaknesses, and political divisions. She knew things about the empire that some High Council members did not know. She told us exactly how humanity would win if the war continued, Zekathara said. Which worlds they would attack, which leaders they would target, which systems they would destroy. It was not a threat, it was a schedule. The hegemony had accepted the human terms within hours. There was no real choice. Continuing the war would have meant the collapse of galactic civilization, and everyone knew it. But Ross had one more surprise for us, Zekathara said. She announced that humanity was interested in establishing cultural and educational exchanges with the hegemony. They wanted to learn about alien science, art, and philosophy. The offer had seemed generous, even friendly. After 2 years of brutal warfare, the humans were extending a hand of peaceful cooperation. Many aliens were relieved that humanity seemed willing to coexist rather than conquer. We did not understand what they were really doing, Zekathara said. The cultural exchanges were not about friendship. They were about making sure we never forgot what humans were capable of. Human students began attending hegemony universities, studying alien technology and social systems. Human artists created works that reminded alien audiences of human military innovations. Human scientists shared research that demonstrated their species' problem-solving abilities. Every human we met was a reminder, Zekathara said. Every friendly conversation was a subtle threat. They wanted us to remember that these polite, curious people were the same species that had turned warfare into an art form. The psychological warfare continued even in peacetime. Human diplomats would casually mention new military technologies their species was developing. Human traders would discuss the resource requirements for various weapon systems. Human tourists would visit historical battlefields and ask detailed questions about defensive strategies. They made sure we never felt safe, Zekathara said. Even when they were being friendly, we knew they were studying us, learning about us, preparing for the next conflict that might never come. 20 years after the war ended, the galaxy was a very different place. The hegemony still existed, but its confidence was broken. No alien species wanted to risk provoking humanity. The mere possibility of human retaliation was enough to prevent conflicts. That is why I am here, Zekthara said, gesturing to the medical equipment around his bed. This facility treats alien veterans who cannot forget what we learned about humans during the war. Thousands of former soldiers from dozens of species suffered from what human doctors called Terran combat syndrome. They could not sleep without dreaming of human tactics. They could not see human faces without remembering the horrors of war. They lived in constant fear of a species that had become their neighbors. The humans won more than a war, Zekthara said. They won the future. Every alien species in the galaxy knows that humans are not to be trifled with. We have become afraid of our own friends. Belnari looked up from her notes. Her hands were shaking as she tried to process everything she had heard.